You can hear us. Welcome. So, is there a question? We're going to do a QA session later at the end. If you have kind of a technical IT type question about the Zoom call, we could take that. Otherwise, we'll save recharge questions for later. I think the hand went down, right? Okay, so welcome all. I'm Kristin Beck, Assistant Director with Butte County Department of Water and Resource Conservation, and thanks for joining our brown bag webinar today. We're excited to have a panel of excellent speakers that are going to cover some different aspects of recharge projects. So really just an opportunity to learn more about what is happening kind of around our region and the state on this topic. It was obviously gained a lot of attention this year with all the wet weather and high stream flows. And the Butte County Water Commission has engaged on this topic as well. And Butte County sent a letter. We can see your screen, just heads up, Joe. Yeah. Butte County has sent a letter to the Sustainable Groundwater Management Office regarding kind of our intent to pursue recharge and develop a recharge action plan, but also communicate some of the needs that local agencies have to be able to think about and implement recharge efforts on the ground. So that's partly where this is coming from, but really just an opportunity to learn more. And so with that, I'm going to introduce Joe Turner. He's going to start us off. The format of today's webinar, we have 4 speakers, like I mentioned. They'll each give a presentation about 12 minutes long, an overview of what they're working on, and then we'll have some moderated panel discussion with a few questions from my end with them, and then we'll open it up for question and answer toward the end of the webinar. So thanks again for joining us, and welcome to Joe. You want to go ahead and kick off? Thank you so much.
All right, thanks, Kristin. Can everybody hear me good?
Sounds good.
Great. So my presentation today, I was going to focus on how we went about 2 particular types of recharge potentials and how we assess them and the data we need to collect and look at that and how they work. So the first one, well, let's see, there we go. So the 2 projects I'm going to talk about is an ASR project, and that's Aquifer Storage and Recovery Pilot Project we did in South Fort Kings, and that deals with using an irrigation well for recharge. The grower at the area had access to water, and we created the piping to go down. We did the pilot study for that. And the second one is a groundwater recharge basin and the things we did to study it and how we're overcoming some of the limitations of the site for the recharge basin to get the water down. So with that, I'll start with the first one. So the ASR project, that was for South Fort King GSA. It was using an active agricultural well. We did minimum modifications. We added filter and the piping, as I said, to get the water down. And just for this one, it was funded in part by a California Resilience Challenge grant for the area. So the well in itself, and it's the LR19 you see in this area right here, is the actual well we had. So that's the well we're injecting the water to. But we also had 6 existing observation wells that we looked at around the area to look at the effects of recharge while we were going through. So some of the preliminary steps we needed to do, and when you're going to ASR injecting, there's, with a pilot study, we didn't need to go permits, but this type of activity would require more permitting, working with the water board. So we had to do some modeling for the water board, demonstrate that we weren't going to impact wells before we started, both with water quality and difference in water levels and things like that. So we had to write a work plan with the WDR. These are considered injection wells, so you also need to get a UIC permit, which is an underground injection well, which these are considered class 5 with the EPA. Just in general, if the water board's okay, the EPA goes ahead and permit these. They just look to the water board for any issues. So we started with video in the well, so we knew all the details, screen intervals. We conducted a pump test to show, how much water, it could produce, what effects from drawing down were on these observation wells. What we saw, a lot of domestic wells, there was no impact, so we were pretty comfortable we weren't going to impact them from the pump test. We did some baseline water quality, and then we secured the water source, which came from a delta. And then we installed all the wells with transducers. So some of the pilot tests, some of the initial problems we had is air entrapment. This is something when I came down to the site, they were having problems injecting. And from my work, from environmental and doing injection wells, I kind of recommended they need to look at when you do this, you don't want air to go down your lines. If you bring air down the wells, you'll get air bubbles out in the pocket and you'll have problems getting water down. So you need to design these so that you're not dragging air down the well. So that's one thing you really want to take care of. And also, if you get it too bad, you could affect the well's ability to pump afterwards. So that's something you really want to take care of. Our average injection rate was 750 GPM, and over the time, it was about I believe 36 days, or I can't remember how long we went pumping, but it was like 36, 40 days, and we injected like 80 acre feet down. And then we were able to recover. We took a period off of around 36 days, and then we pumped the water back out. And we were able to pump at 1600 GPM, and the grower used the water for his irrigation. He took it right back out and used all the water for irrigation. And we recovered all 80 acre feet from that. Then afterwards, we did another pilot test, pump test. We saw the lower specific capacity, so we had to rehab it. And we also saw scaling was involved. So these are issues you want to look at and be able to take care of if you're going this route. We were able to get the well to pump back at what it was before, but we did lose a little bit of specific capacity from this operation. And there's things we can do to minimize that in future with doing this. This was going out there and doing it relatively quick. So those are types of things you want to look at. Make sure you're not damaging the well that you're using for this. Now, some of the advantages of ASRs, we can store the surface water as groundwater when available in abundance, get it down the well. When the farmers aren't using the irrigation well, we can get it down the well. We can store it in dry seasons and use it for potable water. We can maximize the high flow for whatever benefit you want. And we can use the wells to target recharge in specific areas. Maybe, your purpose is to try to get it to a specific aquifer at a specific depth. So you could choose wells at those depths to do this. And then also the type of recharge can be selected to fit the property, whether multiple or you may do it in conjunctions. As I said, some of the challenges was you need the surface water. In this case, the grower had the access, he had the ability to take the water out of the canal, but we did need to construct the pipeline to bring it to the well. So, the further away you get, the higher cost to get that water there. And we also needed to put filter systems on. So there's costs involved with this. And then you really need to understand your well construction and condition. You want to look at that well. If it's old and the casing's poor, you probably don't want to do it in those types of wells. And as I mentioned, one of the issues you really need to take care of using a well that's not specifically designed for ASR, making sure we're not dragging that water down, air down and infecting out in the formation. And I wanted to show this one. I went through it pretty quick and I wanted to get through my 12 minutes. So that one I went through relatively quick to give you that kind of idea. And I'm going to spend more of my time on the other site, which is the city of Stockton. This is at their Delta Water Treatment Plant. They had built the water treatment plant, and early on in the feasibility study, they looked at taking a lot of the property they had for making it a recharge basin. They had around 70 acres of open land they wanted to look at. So they hired us to come out and look at the site and give the feasibility. So just some of the field programs we did to help assess this. We use, and all of this data is used to get what are infiltration rates, what are pathways down from the basin, can it get down to the groundwater, can the groundwater accept it, what are the issues down there, and can you pump the water back out? So some of the techniques we use for CPT and the CBT, here's the rig right here. It's just a truck. It's not very big. They have track rigs if you have issues with getting out to areas. And it's just pushes an instrument down and reads resistance, and you can see the soil types from it. But the other thing we used it for is you can get estimates of infiltration, and that's this graph here. It doesn't show too well, but these lines here are showing the horizontal hydraulic conductivity as we go down. And these values are ranging from around 20, and these are the sands that you're seeing, these high areas down to the groundwater are ranging from 20 feet per day up to 340 feet per day. So this gives you real good information. There's another technique that we use that it's a hydraulic profile, and it's an instrument that goes along with it. You put in, and you can get more direct readings at specific zones of what your infiltration rates are. The other thing we did was an electrical resistivity survey. It's similar to the AEM study you've seen up in your basin. And just to tell you, the AEM study is kind of a broad band looking at things and helps you maybe focus where you want to go. But these types of techniques, if you get to a small area, you really want to come to more of a land-based, something similar to AEM's, the tow tin that can do this. I used an ERP, electrical resistivity, and you can see the features here. The red would be the nice gravels, the blue would be the clays, and helps you see the pathways going down and how would water move to the surface. On the other thing, we put in soil borings. We did what's called downhole permeability tests, using specific drilling methods. That way you can stop at a depth, and you just basically put water down the drill casing, and you're getting what's the infiltration at that specific depth. That's this graph here, and you basically just look at the slope of the line going down. That gives you kind of infiltration depth, infiltration rate at specific depths going down, so we can see how will water move down and what kind of infiltration. From those methods, we saw very high when we got to the sands versus low. And then we also put in a couple wells to look at the aquifer properties, did a pump test so we could see reactions between some of the different zones we saw. With that, here's some of the results. So the first thing, just looking at the geology, this little graph, and that's only about 100 feet between my pumping well and the monitoring well. The monitoring well, I put in 3 screens at where we see different depths, and this is the water level right here at about 50 feet. And just in this real localized area, we saw 3 little water bearing zones that we monitored. And then the pumping wells here we put down in this area that had the better production, so we could do the pump test and everything. So what we saw, just looking at water, so if water goes down, we saw just locally that the water here and here is not locally hydraulically connected. And you can see this is the graph of the well right here. It responds pretty much immediately with the pumping. This well's right here. It doesn't really have a response, but you can see it's draining down, so that's leakage. So we're seeing right here in this area, if we recharge, we're going here, can we get this water down to the more regional? And that's something we had to look at. How we're just looking at the regional trends of this nested well, you can see they all kind of respond the same regionally, which kind of gives us that indication that they're really connected, just not in this local area. And we'll see that, we demonstrated that's true in some of the other information we did. So we started with this we had 3 zones. If we put the water down, are we just going to build it up in a perched water system and limit what we can do, or can we get the water down to the regional aquifer? So what we did is we took all the data from the geophysics, the borings we took, and we did a 3D model of the site, and using all the information and converting it. And this kind of gives you a still shot. It's an animation, so you can take this, turn it around, and look at things. And from that model, we also produced this fence diagram. And what you're seeing is it was showing us that those 3 layers are really connected as you move across the site, and we're comfortable that the water can get down. You can see here that the yellow ones are high permeable, the orange is kind of intermediate, and then the gray are the clays. But you can see as we move to the south and to the west, these units start to connect. The water would get there. So our model is the water goes down, hits that shallow, and then it will move either the south, west, or even a little bit to the east and go down to the regional. So we felt comfortable that as the water goes down, we can get down to the regional aquifer. Now, the other thing we look at is we're trying to design the basin. In this case, the client, City Stockton, they have water that goes to the treatment plant. They get about 15 million gallons a day, and they don't use it all the time. So that water is available. They also have water available from some other sources, and they have the ability to send like 22,000 acre feet a year to this area. So we were trying to design the basins that could accept that amount of water. So the other thing we did with the models, we took layers from it, and you can see the 3, 10, 20, 30, 40, and this is what I was going to talk about. You can see the 3 foot down to the 10 foot has a lot of clay, and we applied from our infiltration data kind of what would be rate. So the yellow, we're estimating around 3.5 feet a day, the orange around a foot, and then the clays, something less than 1/2 foot a day. So we took that information. We can see from 3 to 10, it's not very good, but you can see as you get down to 20, we have a lot of good permeable material. If we can get it down here, we can get it down to the water table that's around here, around 50 feet. So from that, we made a design with 3 basins, and this is our preliminary design. We put these 3 basins, 1, 2, and 3 here. And then just to help out for operation, getting surface water and stuff, you might have a lot of sediment into it. So we made these 4 bays to go along with it. So the water will come out of the plant and come into these 4 bays and then go down into the basins. So this plot is one of those ones, this is from 10 feet. So we're looking at 10 feet. And as I said, we only want to excavate to 3 feet because we need to do something with the dirt. They have storage in these areas. We can temporarily store them, so we can do that. But the more you have to, the cost gets really big. If we were digging down real deep, you'd be spending millions of dollars to get rid of it. Some of it we can use to make the berms that go around it. So we had to come up with a way to get the water down. And what we came up with is using basically these infiltration wells that we're going to focus on these yellow areas that are at the 10 feet. We get to the 3 feet. We're putting the design in to have them go down to the 20, 25 foot depth. And then these dashed lines you see here are trenches we're putting in that will direct the water from the basin down to these areas. So it flows down here to where I have the more permeable to try to increase that infiltration rate and get to the higher volumes that we need. So this table is what we constructed, looking at just the 3 foot depth and what kind of infiltration. And, here is our KV estimate. What we did is we took those layers and we averaged it out through each of the basins. These are kind of the acres of each of those 3 basins that you saw. So we're making around 45 acre feet between the 3, and working with the client. We're looking at maybe operating 335 days out of the year. So just at 3 feet, we can get around 11,000 acre feet down using these infiltration rates. But they had 22,000 acre feet. So we needed to come up with that extra 1.44 feet per day operating and everything. So that's what those dry wells are meant to do. Other issues is, other things in this design as you go through it to help out, we're making habitat areas. So where we have the low permeability, we'll probably won't dig, and those can be used for habitats in the area. The pipeline coming in has very high pressure, like 52 PSI. So just to give you an example, if we stuck it up in the air going in, it would go 120 feet in the air. So we joked about maybe making a water park around the area and everything, but we had to do something to dissipate that energy coming out. So we're building in some things to do that with riprap. The 4 bays will help with that, going in with both taking out the sediment and removing some of the energy that's going out to flow down. Operation and maintenance issue is, we have the 335 to make these work good. You want to make sure you have good drying out periods in a basin, because that will help eliminate things getting clogged. Dry them out helps the infiltration. And then a lot of people go and they think after you go, if you're losing infiltration, they've been ripping it. But you want to stay away from ripping these basins, because you'll take the fines and you'll mix them down and you'll actually lose infiltration if you do that. So you got to come up with a system maybe just, go through and not till them in, but just drip through so you can get it, or maybe some type of aeration system. More expensive would maybe, remove the fines and dispose of them. That would be a cost. So those are issues we have to work out. Also down the wells, we're putting gravel, a rather large gravel area on the outside so that the water can go down both the pipe, which we're going to stick a few feet above the ground surface. So the water has to come up and go down. And as I said, the trench is coming in down the gravels, but there'll be maintenance on those wells to remove fines and set up a program. When you lose so much infiltration, you want to stop and do some maintenance on it to improve it. And then we are also looking at, since we have such.
Joe.
Excuse, say again.
Sorry, I'm going to jump in. And
I'm done. I thought I was going too fast, so I was coming up with more.
You're good. So
all right.
You can cover some more of those good kind of details.
Right. Gotcha. So I'll stop sharing.
Perfect. Thank
and
you.
We'll go there.
So Kristin, you want to go ahead and share your screen. And as you do that, I'm going to, there was just one follow-up kind of specific question for you, Joe. Did the injection well owner have surface water diversion rights? I think, and from your first example?
Yes. Yes, he did. He had rights right out of the canal for his irrigation purposes and stuff.
That was his source of water to, yeah. Okay, great. And then we'll save, go ahead and share your screen if you can. Kristin, are you struggling?
No, I'm sorry. I had a moment there. Okay, here we go.
You good?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. I'll pop my video off, and then when I pop on that, if you happen to notice that, that'll be a clue that you're toward the end. Otherwise, I'll jump in.
Perfect.
All right. Thank you, Joe. Go for it, Kristin.
Thank you. Okay. Hi, everyone. Thanks for the opportunity. That was an incredible presentation by Joe. So much technical information, and I feel like I have 100 questions for him. So it's going to be kind of a hard act to follow, but I am just going to do my best to explain to you a very simplified groundwater recharge program that our irrigation district, Yolo County Flood Control and Water Conservation District, has been doing for the past 8 years. And I should say we've successfully been completing it for about 3 of those or 4 of those 8 years. So I've been with Yolo County Flood Control and Water Conservation District for about 8 years, but I've been serving as the general manager for 2. I'm sure some of you have heard of my predecessor, Tim O'Halloran. And so what I'm going to do here is just give you a quick overview of our district and then jump into how we set ourselves up to take advantage of the State Water Board's temporary permitting process for diverting excess flows for groundwater recharge. So even though we are an irrigation district that's technically located in Yolo County, our primary water supplies are located in Lake County. So we manage and operate Cache Creek Dam in Clear Lake, and Indian Valley Dam at Indian Valley Reservoir. Both are located in the Cache Creek watershed. So the Cache Creek watershed here is shown in that light blue blob, and then Clear Lake is on the left and Indian Valley Reservoir is on the right. We release flows from those two for irrigation releases, and it travels about 65 miles downstream through Cache Creek, where we then divert it at the Cape A Diversion Dam. We cover about 200,000 acres in Yolo County, primarily Western Yolo County farmers who are served by our canal system. We have 160 miles of canals and about 120 customers, unique customers. So with that, I'm going to advance here. Here's the current status of the crops that are grown in our 200,000 acres. So even though we have 200,000 acre service area, about 90,000 acres is able to be irrigated with that conveyance system. So as you can see, the number 1 crop this year is almonds, about 14,000 acres. It's followed by hay, oats, wheat, barley, triticale. Tomatoes are pretty prominent in Yolo County. Alfalfa, olive trees are starting to become more prominent. And then wine grapes, rice, sunflower seeds, corn, etc. So this year we had about 82,000 acres signed up, but typically by the end of the season, we'll see that maybe about 90,000 acres ends up using the surface water. So here is the Cape A Diversion Dam, the point where we then take the flows off Cache Creek and put them into the unlined canal system. We have a about 500-foot wide, 5-foot tall ladder that sits on top of this dam. And so typically during the irrigation season, we would inflate that bladder so it allows us to have enough head pressure to bring it into our canal system. But during the winter, if flows are high enough, we're able to just directly divert into the Winter's Canal is here on the left-hand side behind those oak trees. And then the West Adams Canal is what you can see kind of right in the corner there. Here is just a cartoon schematic of that. So kind of twisting us where the west, is actually structured to the north. There's Cache Creek that runs from Cape Hay to just north of Woodland. And then our canal system coming off of the Cape Hay diversion dam then looks like this, where you can see just the aerial view of where the surface water is delivered or is predominantly traveling in the canal system. By policy, we've had an unlined canal system because we've actually found that it is very beneficial to the groundwater, clearly. During the irrigation season, we have on average about 25% of that water is lost to the groundwater. And it is something where it's very, very obvious during dry years, the lack of connectivity or the lack of contribution by our irrigation water or irrigation flows does result in domestic wells nearby drying up. And it's something that our board has continued to say we need to have this be a service and a policy so that we can ensure the groundwater aquifer is being healthy and sustained. On our website at yologroundwater.org, you can see all of our fabulous monitoring wells that we have in place. We have over 500 wells in our system. About 28 of those, maybe about 31, I should say, are real-time wells, SCADA wells. And so it's very helpful to have this robust data set that we can use to observe groundwater trends and something that we can show the State Water Board in having these conversations about how we want to have a permit for excess storm flows off Cache Creek that then lets them know we can be transparent with the data that's available. Giving you kind of like an overview of the subbasin. This is a historical hydrograph from 1975 to 2023. And so this is providing you with a depth to water measurement for the aquifer. It's about an averaging of 150 wells that are in the district service area. And the fall measurements tend to be those low points, and the spring measurements are the high points. And so this sawtooth pattern is very usual for our area since it is a large agricultural subbasin. And so we like to show the recovery that can occur at certain times. Specifically, this most recent recovery was almost as successful as the 1977 to 1978 recovery. You can see from fall to spring of this past year, we had almost 28 feet of recovery on average. And so this is always a helpful tool for us to show the state of the basin, similar to other GSAs. I'm sure Butte has a lot of amazing data. Here's the real-time wells. So this is just a map. The orange dots and red dots indicate where the real-time wells are located. And then the blue is the canal system. The green is Cache Creek. And then you can see Woodland, Davis, City of Winters, and then the 5055 intersection there. And so what we do is we check on the state of the basin with these real-time wells to try to evaluate how we're doing this year relative to last year and this year relative to a previous drought, which was 2015. So this is as of yesterday, August 22nd, where it gives you a depth to water measurement for every year of August 22nd. And then these two right-hand columns give you an averaging, give you the delta. And what I then do is I average it for those. So that first column, the average difference is about 26 feet. So we're still about 26 feet higher than we were last year at this time. And then the average has shown that we're still about 15 feet higher than we were in 2015, August 22nd, 2015. So this is just a really helpful tool for us to look at hydrographs and get a good idea, similar to DWR surface water map that they put out to let you know what the percentages that you are abnormal and et cetera. This is something that's helpful for us to give us a state of the basin. So in addition to having this policy of unlined canal and a program of groundwater monitoring, we then also took on a project of ensuring that we had significant investments in SCADA upgrades and allowing for automation throughout the canal system. So we have our supervisory control and data acquisition system inventory we have 72 control sites. We have dam control flow and canal level and flow, which essentially means that from the computer, we can set certain stages or flow criteria that would allow for these automated gates to change and fluctuate as needed to ensure that the water in the canal system maintains as level as possible. This is helpful to make sure irrigation deliveries are consistent. But we've also felt that in doing this investment in our canal system and upgrading it, it has allowed for us to not only remotely control the system, but to ensure we're working towards an on-demand irrigation season and ensuring we can use it in the winter for winter recharge. And so here's a picture just of, of one of those sites. And so this one is, as you can see, it's showing the solar panel on top, and there's a SCADA box there, and these gates just open and close remotely to allow for what the upstream downstream conditions need to be. Here's another one that's showing level and flow control. And then this is, as I mentioned, connected to the SCADA system. So in addition to how we look at the groundwater monitoring wells in a real-time fashion, we can go and look at the canal system and show where the water is at certain times. And so talking to the State Water Board about a temporary permit for excess flows, they also really appreciated seeing this system set up so that we could track where that water is going to really make sure it's going into the ground. And so this is the Cape diversion dam that is showing excess flows. And as you can see, it's very muddy or very chocolate milky. And that is not when we want the water. So we had to have conversations with the State Water Board about, well, excess flows for us are really best when they're the tail end of the storm, when the sediment laden flows are dropping out of it so that they're not plugging up the canal system. So we really need that descending leg of a storm event and the lower storm flows for continued recharge. And so we had to work with them on a permit meeting all these conditions, which I'll explain in just a second, that took this into consideration while also not impacting downstream beneficial users. And so this is a shot from this year when we did the recharge program. As you can see, it's still looking pretty brown, but we did it the best we could this year under the existing conditions, because one thing that's really a big challenge is that we have to manage this alongside with any storm damage that's occurred in the canal system. Since it is an unlined earthen canal, there can be some overtopping or some seepage issues that result in us actually not even being able to use the canal. So the temporary permitting process has been capable because of the Governor Brown's executive order, B 3615 and B 3917, specifically the older ones, that resulted in the State Water Board having to streamline their permitting process and having to expedite the temporary permits specifically. And so in coordination with the Department of Water Resources, the Bureau, CDFW, and the regional board, we were able to come to agreement on what conditions would need to be in this permit, our permit, to make sure that the downstream users are not impacted. And as you can imagine with the Bureau and DWR, the primary thing is that they want the delta to be in excess because they want to ensure that their issues or their needs are always being met. And so the delta has to be in excess, flows at the Yolo gauge, which is just north of the town of Woodland, downstream of our diversion. We have to have at least 50 CFS there. And then we can only divert from January 1st to April 30th. And so here you can see, this is just the summary table of the 4 years that we've successfully diverted, and then the amount of water that has been diverted. 2016 was the best year we had. First year we did it. The conditions worked out perfectly. What really, really helps us is if Cache Creek Dam is having sustained flood releases, because we have a decree that governs how those flood control releases have to be done. And so that was just really perfect storm of events, how it worked out. We haven't been able to duplicate that yet in the 2017, 2019, and then this year storms. We did have significant damage to the canal system that resulted in us having to try to prioritize it as best we could while also trying to get in there and repair the system. The temporary permit that we obtained is only a 180-day permit, and the State Water Board is suggesting that we go and get a long-term permit. And so we're going to start working on that. But there's a big deterrent to a long-term permit. It relates to the cost of it. This permit probably cost a couple $1,000s. And so I have a slide and 2 slides here that'll show you how much it is for a long-term permit. We are hoping to expand the canal recharge onto farmers' fields. And so we're working with TNC and Audubon to try to get that going, because it'd be nice to spread it out if possible. And then here is just that slide on the water right fees as of 2021. I should probably update it, but it's almost $500,000 to obtain a long-term permit. And as you can see here, the temporary permitting costs are much cheaper. I had to show you a zoom in here of the difference. And so it's something that we'd like to continue using, the temporary permit. And I think the state should make it available to anyone because it's cheaper, but it's kind of difficult with how water code is structured. So this is my last slide. The thing is that really helped set us up for success is to have this policy, this program, and this project in place, and for us to go and advocate at the State Water Board level on how unique our watershed is, how everyone's watershed is unique, and it's not one size fits all. We had to outreach a lot, obviously, to the community, and we had to optimize the system while balancing the objectives. So those construction activities, the weather dependent considerations, avoiding diverting sediment, and then the debris buildup. And then lastly, which we continue to try to promote with the State Water Board, is to maximize flexibility to achieve sustainability. And so that is all I have. Thank you so much for your time. And I'm obviously going to stick around for questions afterwards.
Thank you. Thank you, Kristin. That's great. Ryan, you want to go ahead and share your screen? I don't see any kind of specific follow-up questions for you, Kristin, but this is great. I mean, so far kind of seeing a landowner level type project from Joe, and then a recharge basin type project, and now from Kristin, really that district level type recharge. So really good variety of what recharge can look like. And with that, we've got Ryan, who is a water resources engineer for Larry Walker Associates. So go for it. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, sounds good.
Great. Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Ryan Fulton with Larry Walker Associates. Thank you to Kristina for inviting me to speak at this brown bag event. I'll be providing a brief overview, primarily on the Dunnigan Area Recharge Program. But before I begin, I want to recognize a few others who have contributed, including Bill Vanderwall with Dunnigan Water District, Yolo Sub-Basin Groundwater Agency, the Westside Sacramento Integrated Regional Water Management Program, Shelley Murphy with Colusa County Water District, and numerous other stakeholders and organizations. Okay, so here's an outline of my presentation. I'll start with background on Dunnigan Water District, provide an overview of their recharge program, discuss challenges with funding and water rights, review recharge efforts over the past year, and introduce a similar program being implemented nearby. Okay, so Dunnigan Water District is one of 17 Central Valley Project contractors along the Tamacalusa and Corning canals. Water is diverted from the Sacramento River in Red Bluff and is conveyed approximately 120 miles south along the west side of the Sacramento Valley to the district. The district service area is approximately 11,500 acres and provides customers non-potable water for irrigation purposes. As shown in the map, the district is located between Arbuckle and Samora. Both areas have been identified as areas of concern in their respective groundwater sustainability plans, with significant subsidence and other groundwater-related issues. The district holds 19,000 acre-foot USBR service contract. Each year, the district is allocated a portion of their contract amount, depending on Shasta Lake water levels and environmental flow requirements. From 2020 through 2022, the district had 0% of their allocation. This year was the first year in 3 years that they had 100% allocation. Okay, so Dunnigan Water District is the local sponsor of the Dunnigan Area Recharge Program. The district is working closely with Yolo Sub-Basin Groundwater Agency to share data and to help support ongoing SGMA compliance efforts. The program's goal is to recharge up to 5,000 acre-feet each year through managed aquifer recharge to supplement groundwater supplies, including for domestic use, provide habitat for migratory shorebirds, and enhance potential groundwater-dependent ecosystems. The 5,000 acre-foot of recharge is a goal the district set. It's based on one, that DWD occupies 11% of the land area within the North Yolo management area. And two, 5,000 acre feet is 16% of the groundwater depletion in the North Yolo management area. So it seems pretty fair and kind of accounts for the district share of the contribution. Dunnigan is a severely disadvantaged community with a population of 1,400. Residents are reliant solely on groundwater for their drinking water. As shown on the map, water will be diverted into ephemeral streams and onto fallow farmland using primarily existing infrastructure to convey the water. A monitoring network has been developed to track groundwater conditions in near real time. Monitoring sites are located across the district, as shown by the green dots on the map. Okay. So as mentioned, recharge sites are fields and ephemeral streams. The project will flood about 600 acres of fallow farmland each year for seasonal shorebird habitat. Additionally, water will be diverted into Buckeye, Dunnigan, and Oak Creeks and Azevedo Drain when dry. The concept is to mimic nature by trickling flowing water into the streams. There's about 14 miles of ephemeral streams. The figure on the right shows different stream aquifer interaction scenarios. Streams can be either gaining or losing and can change over time. Streams in the Dunnigan area are losing streams disconnected from the water table, making them good candidates for recharge. Okay. The next, funding and water rights challenges. The program is grant funded for now. Eventually, landowners and water users will have to self-sustain recharge efforts. There is currently lots of funding available for monitoring and infrastructure improvements. There's very little water and funding available to purchase water, which poses a significant challenge. Additional discussions are needed to identify long-term funding options to help sustain the program. For an alternative water supply, the district is pursuing winter water rights to divert water from the Sacramento River during high flows and to capture natural flow in ephemeral streams. However, there are challenges in obtaining water rights. The figure in the upper right shows the water available to divert given the constraints in the streamlined groundwater recharge permitting process through the state board. The dashed area corresponds to water available for recharge. As you can see, there's very little water available. The figure on the lower right presents an alternative water availability assessment consistent with the approach used for Site's reservoir. As you can see by the dashed area, more water is available, but is subject to the state board's approval, which can take time and money. So in February 2022, the district performed an initial recharge assessment in Buckeye Creek when the Tehama-Colusa Canal had to be dewatered to complete the repair. Approximately 275 acre feet was discharged starting Thursday, February 3rd through Friday, February 11th. About 50% of the water was discharged in the initial 24 to 36 hours. Estimates showed that approximately 200 acre feet recharged into the aquifer. The image shows the monitoring sites used to measure groundwater levels before and after the recharge event. And the hydrograph shows how groundwaters responded. And you saw about a 6 to 9 inch increase during and a little bit after the recharge event. Here are a few photos while recharging into Buckeye Creek. So after some promising results in establishing funding partnerships with the West Side Sacramento IRWM program and the Nature Conservancy, the district recharged about 2,100 acre feet since October 2022 using purchased water from senior water right holders, regular contract water, Section 215 water, and excess water in the Tamaclusa Canal. The table summarizes by water supply type, the volume used, and the associated cost per acre foot. Purchased water from senior water right holders is the most expensive. Due to the drought, this was the only water available in 2022. So the Nature Conservancy helped purchase this water. And as mentioned earlier, the district has a 19,000 acre foot service contract with the Bureau. This water is $86 per acre foot. The most economical and probably the most promising option for direct groundwater recharge is through Section 215 water, which is defined under Section 215 of the Reclamation Reform Act. 215 water is unstorable irrigation water to be released for flood control or as unmanaged flood flows. It's exempt from the pool cost provisions, making it a cheaper option to purchase. And since we had a wet winter, this water was available over the last year, well, since the beginning of the year. And then lastly, the district was able to utilize rainfall that accumulated in the Tamaclusa Canal for recharge. This water was free to the district, but only a limited amount was available. Here. So in the fall of 2022, the district applied 300 acre feet across the 170 acres. This was done in partnership with the Nature Conservancy. Approximately 92% of the applied surface water depercolated, with the remaining water being lost to evapotranspiration. This slide shows two hydrographs from nearby wells. The first hydrograph, the purple line, is located northwest of the fields. The second hydrograph, the blue line, is located west of field 4, as you can see on the map. The hydrograph showed an increase to groundwater levels of approximately 5 to 8 feet, with understanding there's a lot of factors that influence groundwater levels. Looking at the hydrograph in a little more detail, a nearby well was turned on around November 3rd, causing groundwater levels to drop. And starting on November 21st, the landowner started to pump groundwater for habitat, essentially recirculating the recharged water. And then interestingly, you'll notice a groundwater decline along the blue line around November 13th through the 17th, and not along the purple line. The landowner turned on a groundwater well to the south of field 4 starting on the 13th, and increased flow on the 14th. The increase in flow seems to be reflected in the slope of the line. Additionally, since the purple line did not fluctuate, you start to observe the radius of influence and drawdown from the well. Okay. So here are a couple photos while conducting the recharge. They were taken November 3rd. From the figure on the left, you can see how we tried to maintain ponding depths for shorebirds. TNC asked if we could try to maintain ponding depths of about 4 inches, as that makes kind of the best habitat for the shorebirds. However, due to the limited water supply and how fast the water infiltrated into the soil profile after the dry summer, we had a hard time maintaining ponding depths in some areas. Even with the lower ponding depths, the shorebirds utilized this ground. It's just shown in the figure on the right. It's a little blurry, but I think you can make out the birds. Let's see, so this slide shows a hydrograph for the same monitoring wells as in 2 slides ago. This time period is from October 2022 through April of this year. Overall, groundwater levels increased by 40 feet. As part of this effort, we're working with the GSA in the area and their modelers to assess what portion of the groundwater increase was from the managed versus natural recharge. So hopefully have additional results coming. And then, so for project outreach, here are a few links if you'd like to look at some articles, and there's a video developed by DWR. I believe these slides will be made available later, so you can have access to the links. And then lastly, a similar program is being implemented in the Arbuckle area. This area is an area of concern in the Sacramento Valley with significant subsidence. Colusa County Water District is sponsoring this project. The district is located along the Tehama-Colusa Canal, just north of Dunnigan Water District. The goal is to implement a similar program while prioritizing in-lieu recharge. The district received a Prop 1 grant through the Northern Sacramento Valley IRWM program. So with that, I'm happy to take questions, and here's a list of all the project partners.
Awesome. Thank you, Ryan. Yeah, that's great. Couple kind of new and different examples too, using ephemeral stream beds and then the direct recharge on farm scale. So that's excellent. Thank you for that. Yeah, perfect. And then Jenny, you want to go ahead and start sharing your screen? While you're doing that, I think there's a good question here to Kristin. What were the uses of recharged water, and have you measured the economic environmental benefits of these stored supplies? I think this also gets at an earlier question, kind of about ownership. When you're taking surface water, the rights associated with that, and put it in the ground, it remains kind of stored surface water in the ground. Can you speak to that briefly, Kristin, or we can
Yes.
keep it for later too?
No, happy to be really brief. So that was one confusing thing that the State Water Board was like, wait a second, you want to put the water in the ground, but you don't want to be the overlying user to extract it out. And so we had to go through a process with our board. Every year we sign a resolution and we say, we are allowing the overlying groundwater holders rights to use this water that we're putting in as our water prior to their overlying right. So thankfully, they don't ask for us to formally account for that in any way, but we do have to show that within a certain time period, the groundwater is being extracted, and we do it in a very simplified way. And this is the state's term of last in, first out. And the fact that they're kind of accepting that as an accounting methodology is pretty big, but it's going to get more complicated, I'm sure, as people want to actually have credit for the water that they may be putting in. Hopefully that answered that question.
Yeah, that's great. So if you're operating kind of out of a crediting system, then the district essentially kind of formally abandons that recharge for the benefit of others to pull out first.
Yes. Yes. And related to the environmental benefits, that's something that CDFW has commented on our permit recently, is that we need to do a better job of accounting for the contribution to GDEs and interconnected surface waters. And they're suggesting we say that 25% stays in the ground for those purposes, which is fine in theory, but practically, how do we make sure of that? And so that's another one.
Yeah, challenging. All right, thank you so much for jumping in there. All right, Jenny, take it away.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, you sound good.
Great. I had technical difficulties. We've recovered now. Okay, so we'll be talking about groundwater recharge that's happening in Glenn County. I work for a firm called Water and Land Solutions that's working on this project along with Geosyntec. And you heard from Joe Turner earlier, so he's the hydrogeologist involved in this project. And this is through the Glenn Groundwater Authority. So it's one of the GSAs in Glenn County, kind of the main one in the Colusa subbasin. And what they are doing is kind of a twofold project for groundwater recharge. The first is to do some pilot projects this water year. So they said, let's just do the simple projects, nothing complicated from water rights perspective, no new conveyance, just what's out there that we can implement, kind of the low-hanging fruit. And we ended up putting together over 15 sites between two water districts that are happening in the Orland area, one of which is public. If you want to go visit it, you'll see that later. And a lot of these are pretty small sites, flows of 4 CFS, a couple thousand gallons per minute, up to 10 CFS. And then they're also doing some long-term planning. We won't talk a whole lot about that, but Basically, they wanted to get their feet wet this year, literally and figuratively, do some groundwater recharge projects, and then see what would be the best projects for the long term, not necessarily these projects. So the background for this, the why for direct groundwater recharge in the Orland area is this visual here, especially these purple dots. They had hundreds of dry wells in this area from spring 2020 to fall 2022. A real feature in this area is Stony Creek, which you can see kind of running through those dry wells. You can see this is the Orland here, and Stony Creek runs here. And when Stony Creek runs, a lot of these wells don't have problems. When it doesn't run, then there can be challenges, and compounded with, increased agricultural pumping when there are no surface water deliveries can exacerbate the issue and cause the dry wells that we saw. So this green line here, just for a point of reference, is the Orland unit water users boundary, which we'll talk about them in a moment. But the feature there is that partners are an important part of groundwater recharge projects. Glen Groundwater Authority saw the dry wells. The community's been very concerned about it. You can see land subsidence on the picture to the right is growing. That's the Artois area between Orland and Willows. There's a lot of concern about these kind of undesirable results. And Glen Groundwater Authority doesn't own land. They don't have water rights. They don't have conveyance. So all of their efforts have to be done in partnership with others. So looking at these challenges are really the goal. You could look at your water budget. You could say we're a little bit short on a, kind of a paper exercise. It looks like we need more water in the system, or we need to reduce demand, which of course has economic impacts. But the real goal for Glen Groundwater Authority was to address these specific challenges: dry wells, especially domestic wells around the Orland area, and then land subsidence. It's not so much about what we need to do to pencil out whether there's enough water in the basin. It's about really felt needs. And that in turn, I think, led to an opportunity. There's a real sense of urgency in this area. Folks have been concerned about this for a while. For a couple of decades, some folks have been kind of stockpiling ideas for groundwater recharge projects. So when all those factors came together and it was go time, we were able to put some projects together very quickly. And of course, the other thing that was an opportunity this year, which Ryan touched on too, was the wet winter. There's something called Section 215 water, which was available this year because of excess flows in the Sacramento River, those winter flows, and it was available at a very low cost at $12 an acre foot. In this area, this is kind of surface level infiltration is what's represented here. It's called the SAGBI maps, SAGBI if you want to Google it. And you could see some of these gravel stratas here coming out from the Orland area, which are really important for groundwater recharge. For those of you in Butte County, this is the Sacramento River, and then Chico over here more. So you could see really excellent infiltration in certain areas. And then I'm from rice country. My family's in Richville growing rice, and not so great infiltration down there. But in the Orland area, we're working in these gravel stratas mostly. There are a lot of gravel pits. Everybody's got a basin. So there were a lot of opportunities. And then they did feel like having some of these executive orders provided an additional level of cover. The council, the attorney for the Glen Groundwater Authority, was confident that these activities are not, don't require Sicke documentation, and they are within their rights to do this, but it was still helpful to just have some of these executive orders in place. So we worked with two partners, the first of which is Orland Artois Water District, and they ran about 15 sites. And the general manager there has been interested in groundwater recharge for 2 decades and has just been sitting on it and waiting for the day when he could do some groundwater recharge. They receive water through the Tama-Colusa Canal and have a piped system, but there were just like all these sites where he said we could put a little water here, put a little water there. So it was a really spread out, diffuse type project. The district ended up funding it themselves rather than through Glen Groundwater Authority. So I do want to call that out. This is a relatively small district where in times of drought, when they receive zero surface water, their landowners rely on groundwater, and they felt it was important to do some groundwater recharge. and they really put their money where their mouth was, and they were a helpful partner in managing the flows too. So this is just, you know, an example. The visual here is that it's diffuse. There are a lot of sites, small flows, but collectively they can make a difference. So we did 1,700 acre feet this first year. And here are a few examples of them. This is irrigated pasture. You can see the water just being delivered through a pipe. We did the groundwater recharge the same way that they irrigate that pasture. It just spreads over the landscape and infiltrates in through relatively rocky soil. I'm showing a few examples here for folks who are considering groundwater recharge in their area, who think it'll be an important part of addressing groundwater challenges, being sustainable with their groundwater. These will hopefully give you some ideas. Another one here is a drainage ditch. So a lot of places have drainage ditches kind of along county roads. And this one is just a, you know, the outlet is here. They added in some pipe to be able to put water into the ditch. And this is in January where evaporation rates are low. We're getting a lot of infiltration here, and all of that is infiltrating to the groundwater. Here's a dry drainage ditch that was used for a time as well. So another example of one of those. And then some sumps in this area. There used to be a lot of flood irrigation. Farmers would dig kind of a big pit, a sump at the bottom of the ranch to collect tailwater from irrigation and pump it back up to irrigate fields again. These two sumps in particular must have been terrible for that use, because they are excellent for infiltration for groundwater recharge. The one on the left, so Joe put a transducer in there and we measured the infiltration rates. When we shut it off, it had 6 feet of water in it, and that water was gone within 15 hours. So on a 24-hour basis, that's 10 acre feet per acre per day. So this was a 1/4 acre site that was able to recharge 300 acre feet. But if you had, you know, a 10 acre basin and you could do 10 feet a day, you can quickly get up to some good recharge. The one on the right here was just about as productive, but we didn't have the same level of monitoring in that one. And then the other projects that we're doing, so those were all in the wintertime with excess flows through Orland Artois. Now we're working with Orland unit water users to look at something completely different in the irrigation season, in the hot summer months, addressing groundwater infiltration, groundwater recharge right in the Orland area within the city limits of Orland, where there was that concentration of dry wells. So this district is quite a bit different. We've had to change the way we think about and deliver water for groundwater recharge. They have open lined canals. There's no infiltration or limited infiltration through the canals, but they're open. They're not as willing to participate in winter groundwater recharge because they're concerned about flood control. Floodwaters entering their canals when there's already water in there for groundwater recharge, overtopping damage to life and property in the area. So for us, an irrigation season groundwater recharge project might continue to be the best option here. They deliver their water at a 12-day rotation, which I won't get into, but is very different than most irrigation districts, even an open canal district like a Western Canal District. And we're working with private landowners, one of which is truly a private landowner, one of which is the city of Orland. We're targeting 600 acre feet, and again, a relatively low water cost. So the two projects here, this was a gravel pit that's right on I-5. When I-5 was built, they removed material from this pit for the construction of I-5, creating this pit. So now we can use it for groundwater recharge. In the Orland area, everybody's got a gravel pit in their backyard. Everybody's saying, come use my gravel pit. The county has half a dozen. I mean, they're everywhere. So this is something that's unique to this area that not everyone has, but it's a great opportunity for them. And then the other one is here, a pond at Laley Park, which is a lovely city park in Orland. You can see it's right here where there's great public access. This is a rec center where there's gymnastics lessons, and there's 3 ball fields here, playground, great splash pad. And this is a really important one for Glenn Groundwater Authority in terms of community outreach. There's been a lot of frustration, I think, with the SGMA process locally as folks weathered through the drought of the last 3 years. A lot of kind of lay people just felt like things weren't happening quickly enough. And those of us who are really in it, I think, know that there's a huge level of commitment from the stakeholders, and we're moving forward. It's just such a big process, and there's so many things to address that it feels like they all need to be addressed at once. So this, I think, is a really important communications tool for them too, to show folks that they're taking action, that dry wells are really of concern to them, the groundwater is really of concern to them. And then folks can learn more about groundwater recharge. And we don't yet have signage, but we're working on some signage to put on the perimeter of this, so that when folks are at the ball fields, they can learn more about groundwater recharge. And at all of these sites, there's a well nearby. One is continuously monitored by DWR. The others need to be sounded by hand weekly. We have transducers in this site and the previous one I talked about, as well as the one with the 10-foot infiltration rate. And all of these projects, I think, are what I really like about working with groundwater recharge is, to me, it's kind of a restoration of a natural process that's been lacking. So we call it artificial or managed recharge, but really all these creeks, streams, rivers, when there was a heavy storm, they would have topped their banks, they would have the water would have spread out over the landscape, and there would have been infiltration into the groundwater aquifer. And as we've confined creeks and streams for flood control, we've lost a lot of that. So it's, I think, good to be part of reinstating some of that natural process. And then here are some key lessons learned. The big one for Glen Groundwater Authority is to get started. I think they've learned a lot through this process. The decision makers on the board have come to internalize a lot of things that will be important for moving forward on groundwater recharge. They, of course, have opportunities that not everyone has. I know Vina Subbasin, Corning Subbasin don't have excellent conveyance right now, whereas in this area, there are a number of surface water districts that already exist where you can use conveyance. But just getting going on a small project, I think, really helps with understanding of what those long-term projects could be, how this could be part of long-term sustainability. We found that a diffuse approach makes a lot of sense. So instead of one huge pit, one big basin where you can deliver 50 CFS a day to be able to meet your groundwater recharge targets, and one water source, a diffuse approach works in this area. Again, that's because of the existing conveyance. If you're building conveyance for the first time, that might not be the case. Collaboration, again, Glen Groundwater Authority doesn't have any water rights. They don't have conveyance. They need to rely on partners in the area for those. Water cost was a big hurdle to this happening earlier. So I just want to call that out. There's been a lot of landowner interest in this kind of thing, and a lot of folks have been close over the years to taking this less expensive water and using it for groundwater recharge. But it still is a hurdle because, when it comes to that farmer or that landowner putting water in the ground, knowing that it has a community-wide benefit, will benefit them and their neighbors, and they're going to bear that cost completely. A lot of folks would just kind of get cold feet at the end and not quite implement. So as soon as this project came on board, those were the first folks to sign up because they'd always been really interested. But that seems to be one of the biggest barriers in this area anyway, where there are a lot of sites that are optimal for groundwater recharge. And then in the long term, I think we'll look a lot at in lieu recharge, encouraging surface water use. So instead of pulling out groundwater through pumping for domestic or agricultural use and then putting it back in through direct recharge, it's kind of skipping that in and out and just using surface water instead can be a really good option that can reduce pumping from the deeper aquifer. And probably it'll be a combination of both direct recharge projects for addressing domestic well issues, and then also that diffuse approach allows you to put a little bit of water here and there wherever it's needed most, instead of relying on one big basin that might be well outside of city limits, well outside of that area of influence where you need that water to be for dry wells or whatever the impairment is. So that's it in a nutshell. Here's contact info. Turn it back to you, Christina.
Awesome. Thank you. Excellent. Yeah, so thank you to all of our speakers. If we were in a room, we would give you an applause. Thank you. So thanks for your preparation. I know it takes time to put these presentations together, so we really appreciate appreciate that and your participation. I think I'm going to do just a question or two maybe that we can go around with, and then we'll circle back to, we do have some questions entered in the chat box. Continue to do that if you'd like, and hand raise. So we'll get to you folks in just a few minutes. So I'm curious, I'm just going to jump to, in what aspects of the projects do you find kind of the most stakeholder or board support? And what aspects of these recharge projects have generated the most concern? Can each of you just maybe touch on that briefly?
You went to me. You went to me first.
Sure, go ahead. If you want to pop those on,
well,
that would be great. Otherwise, that's fine too if you need.
Right. Well, the first two projects, you know, the concerns for Stockton, as I was saying, is can we get the water down? They had a lot of the infrastructure already there to put the water there, and they have been planning this project for, I think, 10 or 15 years. So it was, we have all this water, can we get down? So that was the main concern. The stakeholders were pretty much just the city. They own the property, they own the water, so that wasn't a big issue. In the other site, the ASR, that had a lot of stakeholders. The intent of that was to show people there to do it. They were, I'm not sure how far they went there. They were trying to set up a programmatic CEQA through this project with the water board. Hasn't gone much further in that, but you know, this project was to go through what was the permitting required, what would happen, what would be the CEQA, and kind of get a programmatic type approach done with all the stakeholders and get all that done with this, so that when people wanted to do that, they could just go to the county and the CEQA would already be handled.
For the Glen Groundwater Authority, I would say the feedback has been very positive. The community stakeholders have all been really interested and engaged and want to see this happen. If I was to say what's been the biggest concern, I'd probably be digging, honestly, from those folks, because it's really been positive. In terms of from GGA themselves, the cost has been the biggest concern, especially if you're paying the cost of water every time you want to do groundwater recharge, you've got to pay that cost. It's an ongoing cost rather than a one-time cost like a water right.
Yeah, in Yolo, it's similar. The cost is of concern, and there's been more consideration about, well, what does the accounting need to be for the GDEs, the ISWs, and for maybe setting up like a water market. If individual landowners start participating in this process, they want to have a way to get credit for this recharge. But lots of support from the community as a whole, because we're doing it on all our dollar. So I'm sure once we say, oh, we need to find a way to recover these costs, it'll be a different story.
And then in terms of Dunnigan and Colusa County Water Districts, I would agree with what's been said already. The cost has been a big hurdle for them. With some grants, they're able to have some funds to purchase water. There's some concern over access to land, granting the state access to their property. If you accept state funds, that's something they kind of have to do and agree with. And then the environmental aspect with the permitting, and then perhaps altering streams.
Great. So if you were to do it all over again and kind of start from the beginning, is there something you would do differently when you think about the projects that you shared today?
Both of my projects were kind of set and given. If there's anything different on the ASR, more attention to how the water went down. And it was kind of done with the well there in operation, and there's a lot of things you can do with how you get it down. So more little bit attention to that, because we did have to stop. We were dragging air down. We had to do things with that, and maybe a little bit more coordination with the state board, because things kind of stalled out with going towards the CEQA. So getting a little bit more upfront with that. On the Stockton site, probably, that one was more of trying to get that water down, looking more of, how are we going to get it there? We spent a lot of time figuring out the client was kind of against doing pilot studies. He wanted to build it. So we were trying to come up with the best approach to spend the money, the whole thing, and give them a reasonable thinks that we can get the water down. So, I mean, if I had it done differently, I would have liked to done some larger pilot studies of the water going down versus just going straight to it. But I feel comfortable what we're doing. It just took a while to get there working with the data, because it's, we don't poke holes everywhere out there, so we can't say all the water's going down. So I say in that one, be trying to look at a few more pilot studies, similar like we're doing with Jenny on the other projects, to get a handle how the water is really going to go down.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Joe. Any others want to weigh in on this one? It's okay if you don't. All right. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, and Glenn, I would say they'd probably just say they would have started sooner. That would be the best thing would have been to start 10 years ago, 20 years ago.
So Jenny, one follow-up kind of related to the question I asked Kristin earlier on the ownership side of it. Was that addressed kind of explicitly at all, say with the Orland Artois Water District project?
I'm not sure what, could you back up? And
in terms of, they're the ones putting the water in the ground, so technically their water, how did they deal with that?
Yeah, this really has been approached as a groundwater recharge more than a groundwater recharge and recovery project. So it's been recharge for the public benefit provided by the subbasin on behalf of the subbasin. There hasn't been any like credit provided or any delineation of who that water goes to. I see a question from Jim Brobeck there too. And, the water came from those two water districts and is providing a public benefit that GGA paid for and is providing, but there's no specific credit to any of the landowners. None of the landowners have asked for that. They haven't asked for any financial compensation at all. I think, again, because of that sense of urgency.
Yeah, great. Thanks. That's helpful. I think to really see how, depending on what level it happens at, I think really drives kind of how that ownership piece plays out too.
Yeah, and I would also say, sorry, in my mind, a credit is only useful if there's something you could put it toward. And right now there's no limits on groundwater extraction. There are no fees on groundwater extraction. So the credits are just like pretend money. It's monopoly money. So until there's something like that, I think landowners will continue to work collaboratively and might have more of a private interest if there was an extraction fee or an allocation.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yep. So I'm going to go back up let's go to Marty. Marty Dunlap has her hand up. So let's go to you and then we'll switch over to the chat questions again. Let's see. Can you unmute, Marty? There you go.
Great. Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
All right, thank you. So really interesting studies, and thank you for the information. What I'm wanting to see and see more detail on is distinguishing when the recharge efforts are occurring, the depths that the wells are for the recovery of the groundwater, as well as which water tables are we talking about? Are we talking about, more surface water tables, or are we talking about some of the deeper aquifers like the Tehama Formation aquifer, or, I don't know if anybody's touching into the lower Tuscan, but, which areas are showing the recharge with the recovery of the groundwater from the recharge projects? That's my question. Thanks.
Yeah, good question. Does anyone want to tackle that in relation to your project?
Well, for the ASR, they went down to a lower aquifer. They have different ones. So the water was being injected into a semi-confined aquifer. I think the depth was 400 or 500 feet. They spent a lot of time proving and he just pumped it right back out of his well pretty much immediately. So he took it right back out and demonstrated we weren't impacting any of the domestic wells, which were all installed in the shallow aquifer. And we showed that when he was pumping or putting in, we didn't affect it. The city of Stockton, it's recharge basin. There's nowhere for it to go but the first groundwater system. So that's down there, the city themselves. Originally, they were looking at putting a well there down in kind of that same, more permeable gravels below it, but the same aquifer. But at this point, it looks like they have existing supply wells for the city that are little ways, and they'll probably just take it right back out of those wells that are already pumping groundwater. There's some issues, they need to work with the GSA. How much do they get? Is there a percentage left behind? Those issues haven't been worked out yet.
Yeah, so really that ASR well is your most kind of direct example, right? Where you put it in the ground with that well and you pull it out with that well.
Mm-hmm.
Others that are kind of broader,
Right.
maybe a little bit more indirect.
Yeah, and if you waited longer, you probably couldn't take it all out. Because there's going to be factor of timing, and that's things GSAs have to work out, is the timing factor too. You can put in 100 acre feet, but you can't wait 10 years to take it back out because it's just not there anymore. So those are issues that have to be worked out.
Yeah, thanks, Joe.
Yeah. And then for Dunnigan, so their monitoring network consists of 10 wells that are collecting data in near real time. They're primarily abandoned ag wells and some active ag wells. Since they're old production wells, they're screened in different intervals. So we're treating the aquifer more as a big bathtub where water levels go up and down. Depth to water, other monitoring sites range from 20 feet to 180 feet, depending on location. And we have, we're seeing responses in a lot of the wells. They're definitely bigger, at the wells where the depth of water is, 20, 40 feet. But we are seeing some response where the depth is greater.
Yeah, and in Yolo, it's very similar to Ryan's, but we also get anecdotal information from domestic well owners that will, measure their own well while we're recharging, and they'll come in and be like, my well recovered 5 feet this week, and so it seems like it's directly connected to the shallow aquifer, but we'd like to complete an isotope study to kind of learn more about how long it really takes and where it's infiltrating best.
Great.
Great, thank you guys. So there's one question in here that gets kind of to the water quality side of things, which we haven't touched on. So I think it would be good to go there. And Pam Stoser says, I am very concerned with the contamination of the Tuscan aquifer. How are the rechargers going to guarantee that our drinking water resource remains untainted? How will they keep pesticides, herbicides from recharge and flood more projects from leaching into the aquifer? I've heard they only need to wait 30 days from last pesticide use to then use the land for recharge. Many pesticides have very long half-life. How will they monitor that? Can you speak to water quality concerns?
So,
go ahead. You go ahead first.
Okay, ours is really simple though. In Yolo County, we have had farmers that have been hesitant to using their fields because of this concern of water quality impacts. And our temporary permit is written that as long as they're complying with the irrigated lands program, then their fields are safe for us to do this. But I agree, it seems like there needs to be more testing to really ensure there's not an issue. And it seems like ASR wells are the best way to avoid this. So I will turn it over to Joe.
Yeah, on the ASR, we had to write a work plan. We had to do a lot of testing in water quality, both from the surface water, the groundwater, and we had to do it before and after. So if you're going that route, you're going to have permits, and there is going to be water quality testing for the recharge basin. That's, we have a lot of water quality data. The water is really clean. It's surface water. It's coming out of the delta. It's the water that goes through the treatment plant. It's not treatment for contaminants, more treatment for sediments and things like that it goes through. So that's clean water, and we have the analysis. We've been talking with the water board on what they'll want, but we'll have monitoring wells in the first water that will be monitoring these things and keep track of what's going on.
Hey, thank you. Kind of shifting, a lot of what we've talked about has been kind of in the valley. And we know that our subbasins have kind of these foothill flanks. I guess the ephemeral stream project got to this a little bit, but Toby Giesentanner asks, Joe or others, are you aware of any projects in the foothills to essentially slow the flow of water coming out of the foothills through an increase of stock ponds or something like that to get recharge to occur in foothills or offstream?
So if you're getting, I assume you're talking about the foothills around Chico and that area, everything. So that's going to be a little different because that's going to be more of a hard rock environment. You're looking at fractures. So there is some sediment. It's going to be site specific if that would work or not. And geology putting up there would be more of a surface water. If you use the surface water, more like Jenny's talking about, kind of an in lieu, that would help taking water out like that. But when you're getting the fracture, that works completely different than sediments because you got to find those fractures to put the water in, and it's not necessarily going to come from a stock pond getting down to the right areas. I'm not sure if that answered your question, but that's how I understood it.
I'll just say, I know there's a lot of interest in this in Tehama County too, especially on the west side. You know, the Sierras coming out of the east side, streams tend to be bigger, but those ephemeral streams coming out of the west side, they have a lot of interest there as well. I think the challenge will be permitting. You know, if you're talking about increasing residence time and slowing the flow within the stream channel, then you're talking stream bed alteration, you've got flood control concerns, potential impacts downstream. So I think it's a great idea and something that I hope to see the, you know, GSAs across the state tackle over the next decade, but I think it'll take a little while.
Yeah, I was going to say, this is something that also in the west side of Yolo, we're very interested in trying to figure out, because not only is it clear that the upper watershed health has significantly declined, but that's resulted in less recharge and then very extensive flooding as it comes down into the lower areas in the county roads. And so it seems like a multi-benefit solution to just put some catch dams or some stock ponds up in these hills, but we are worried about the permitting triggers that would be involved. I'd love to see if anybody's piloted that though. So it's a really great question.
Awesome. Thanks, you guys. Yeah. Oh, Ryan, did you want to weigh in here?
I guess briefly, I mean, that's kind of the next phase of the Dunnigan project. We're implementing the low-hanging project first, which is utilizing existing water rights. But there is interest to capture the natural flow from Buckeye Creek specifically. It would require a pump and then kind of building up some fills to use as basins. The permitting is an issue. You start talking about stream alterations. And accepting grant funds at the same time. I think there's, you know, different options under different circumstances that you can kind of sort through.
Great. Here's one for Joe that hopefully we can cover quickly. Do you know off the top here, kind of average cost of an infiltration well system? What do those things run?
Well, that one's gonna, you know, be dependent on how close your well is to the source, how big of a pipeline. That's where the majority of costs are. For this one, it was paid for a grant, and I know they had to pull the pump. So I think this project I wasn't involved with that part on the cost, so I can't really answer it too good, but I can tell you that if you're building big pipelines and getting the water there, and then you have to big treatment, that's going to be more expensive than other things like recharge basins. So I can't really answer that for this project, and it's going to be site specific for each one, depending on getting the water there. Do you own the water, or as Jenny pointed out, do you have to pay for the water, and things like that, and whether you got to pull the pump, put the pump back down, and what type of treatment you need.
Yeah, great. Okay, we have one more hand raised, Sue Ellen. We're going to go with you, and then we're just about at the end of our time here. So go ahead, Sue Ellen. Would you like to ask your question? I think we'll be able to hear you if you speak now. Maybe not. Okay, sorry, we can't hear you. Feel free to try again. The last question I want to wrap up, because there's a couple in the chat kind of related to cost. So you highlighted cost as a major hurdle, many of you. And so there's a question kind of about grants as a source of funding and also collaborations. Can you speak to that? What you're thinking about as you move forward in terms of what the potential funding sources might be, or multi-benefit grants? I know we're thinking a little bit about thinking about flood management of flood a little bit differently, right, for multi-benefits. Can you speak to that?
The Stockton one, the investigation was from a Sigma grant, but they also have an IRWIMP grant for the construction, and the city's funding the rest themselves. As I pointed out, the ASR, that pilot study was from a resiliency grant. So there is money out there to do these things. I am working on some other projects down in Madera that are getting funded through Sigma, drought, and a couple other grants. So there's money out there, but the more you make the multi-benefit and looking at different things, the better it is to get some of these grant projects funded.
Yeah, in Yolo, we were fortunate to get a Sigma implementation grant to assist with some of our recharge projects. And then we're currently investigating submitting a few ASR requests through the USBR Water Smart grant. So we're trying to tap into whatever state and federal funds are out there. And we know there's a lot of state money coming for climate, resilience programs.
Yeah, in terms of water costs and grants, I mean, a lot of grants don't cover water. There are a few out there that do, and you just have to look through the funding guidelines to determine what are eligible and ineligible costs. But there are options out there that come up every once in a while.
Yeah, I would just say that as Ryan said, water costs aren't typically paid. So I see this as a real challenge for long-term direct recharge. And an alternative might be, instead of doing, direct recharge where everybody kind of pays for that cost of water, it might make more sense in certain scenarios to connect farmers to surface water systems where then they're paying the water cost and instead they're curtailing their pumping. So you've kind of provided benefits for everyone, but they're doing it as part of their production cost. And that's a more sustainable, I think, model. So it will be a combination. In some instances, you'll still need direct recharge right where you need it. But looking at some of these in lieu opportunities, it makes a lot of sense from a funding perspective.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you. We're going to wrap it up there. We're just over time. So another big thank you to each of you. And we will pull together another brown bag, hopefully in the next month or two. We try to do these kind of every other month, roughly. I see Cammie hopped on. You want to close us out?
I just wanted to say thank you to everyone I know these things take time. We appreciate you spending the time to pull these presentations together. I think as the county and the GSAs here in Butte County move forward with some recharge options, we will look to you for guidance and making sure that we learn from your lessons and perhaps your mistakes. And I see that a lot of people have some questions that we didn't get around to answering. Please feel free to email either Christina or me or just the county at bcwater@buttecounty.net, and we can try and get some answers to your questions or forward them on to the panel, and they might like to respond to them. And again, thank you, Christina, for continuing to help us implement our webinar and educational and outreach program. So thank you all again for participating. Thanks for the participants that are here. We had like over 43 people and listening in. I don't know what the big number got to, but and I'm glad that everyone was able to take time from their lunch to listen in. So thanks.
Thank you. Thanks all. Have
Thank
a
you.
good afternoon.
Bye.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks.